Hey everybody, welcome back. In this video we get to hear Dr. Bruce Lipton, the famous stem cell researcher and the author of The Biology of Belief, answer the question about where the hell do diseases come from. Right, I hope you enjoy it and let's hear it from the doctor.
Before we even get to the human aspect of this, you have to recognize something called the biological imperative. What the hell is that? And that is, it's the drive to survive. And all organisms, this is the point why it becomes critical, is organisms as the bottom organism, bacteria. They are endowed with a biological imperative because if you try and kill a bacterium, it's not going to go, oh, okay, kill me. It's going to do everything it can to stay alive. So every living organism has a drive to stay alive. Well, in that case, it also then has an awareness of what could, compromise that alive. And then we build up an awareness of the scary things that could threaten us so that if they show up in our world, then we're going to immediately make a response to protect ourselves. Let me just because we might get into this later, there are two aspects to the biological imperative: survival of the individual, yourself, let's say, which is meaning why you seek air, water, food, shelter, and things like this, because this keeps us alive. The second one is also very critical because the second part of biological imperative is survival, not of the individual, but survival of the species, which means there's a drive to reproduce to keep the species alive. So we can talk about the individual one first. Okay. So it says when threats come into the environment, the biological imperative is the first to waken you to the threat. Okay. Where is it? Well, that's what he said. Well, in the neural system, I go, we don't even know where it is. And it was there in bacteria before there was much of a neural system. So all of a sudden it goes, boy, we don't know where it is, but we know it exists. and the relevance about that is that we all live by this biological imperative, which protects us. Okay. And then I said, well, as you said, if a threat is looming, then the biology switches its action, community, organization from growth into protection. And they're mutually exclusive. I'll just give you a reason why. If there's a stimulus that offers growth, you go to that stimulus and you go with your arms open to take it in, assimilate. It's growth. It could be food, it could be love. I don't care. You open up, you go to the stimulus, open up and take it in. That's growth. Protection, you go away from the threat and you close yourself down in protection. I say, guess what? You can't be in growth and protection at the same time. They're mutually exclusive behaviors. So when we get into protection, we shut down our openness and our growth in the world, and we start to look at how can I preserve myself in this threat? Okay. And I say, well, how does the body make a response to this? I go, that the hypothalamus, which interprets the signals, interprets the fact that there's a threat. And when it does that, it sends a signal to the pituitary gland. The brain, hypothalamus, says, oh, this is a threatening situation. And it sends a signal to the pituitary gland, which in high school was called the master gland, because its secretions control 50 trillion cells that are in your body. And then in a state of threat, the pituitary sends a signal to the adrenal glands, which in school was called fight or flight. And all of a sudden it says, what happens? The adrenal stress hormones go to the body and they redirect the system. They take away the energies that are involved with like growth, the energies involved with the immune system. And I go, why? Look, if you're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, bacterial infection is not your big deal at that moment, okay? And the immune system uses tremendous amount of energy because when people get sick, sometimes they don't even have energy to get out of bed. Okay, so what are we talking about? When we get in stress, we want to allocate all the body's energy to escape. And escape uses arms and legs. So I go, your energy is where? In the blood. So I go, so what happens when stress hormones come in? They redirect the flow of the blood and they take the blood and preferentially send it to the arms and legs because that's where the energy is going to activate to get me out of there. And I go, well, preferentially, where was it preferentially before the stress? I go, it was in the gut, the viscera, all the organs in here. And I go, well, what were their functions? growth, maintenance of the body, cleaning up the system, preparing the energy, taking care of the machine more or less, okay? But at the moment stress hormones are released in the body, the blood vessels in the gut respond to the stress hormones by squeezing shut. And when they squeeze shut, that means the blood is not really going into the gut, but it's now going preferentially into the arms and legs. And that's where we want to get that energy to run. So number one, stress hormones shut down the growth mechanisms of the body. Number two, they shut down the immune system because that's a high energy system that is not relevant to an external threat. And then number three, which I always call the adding of insult to injury, is the blood vessels in the conscious brain are energizing conscious creativity, thinking, and action like that. But the conscious brain is a very slow processor compared to the rest of the brain back here called the subconscious brain. And the subconscious brain is not only extremely fast beyond conscious brain, but it's a million times more powerful. So what happens is, remember I told you the blood vessels in the gut constrict with stress hormones. That's where people get that butterflies in the stomach kind of feeling, queasy feeling, because what's going on? The blood vessels are all squeezing shut. You can feel them. And that's the queasiness. But then the stress hormones go into the brain and they do the same thing in the conscious blood part of the brain. They squeeze the blood vessels shut. I say, so I'm not nourishing or energizing my consciousness, but when I squeeze it shut, the blood is then sent to the back of the brain where the subconscious has reflex behavior, reactions, high speed, very fast. We become less intelligent when stress hormones are there because we're not using thinking, we're using reflexes. And that's a completely different way of life. So I say, so what happens here? I say, well, growth, taking care of the body. Threat, get the energy into the arms and legs as best you can and run like hell. Get out of there. But at the compromise of what? Well, you're shutting down growth, you're shutting down the immune system, and you're shutting down intelligence. And I go, you don't need that to escape from the tiger. You just need fast arms, legs, and reflexes to make them go. I go, well, this is really great. Back, 200,000-300,000 years ago, where the only real threat we had was the saber-toothed tiger. I go, so what? I say, well, if you're running from that saber-toothed tiger and you escape 10 minutes, 15 minutes, you're gone, you're safe. Then you return back at growth again, maintain the body. Today's world, the threats are so many of them out there that we're not on stress hormones for 10 minutes. We're on stress hormones all day. And I go, what's the consequence? Well, they say all day you are inhibiting the mechanism from taking care of itself. And I say, today we have a health crisis. I go, yeah. A lot of people up until recent times said, oh, the genes are causing the disease and all this kind of stuff like that. Fact of science, less than 1% of disease is connected to genetics. I was saying, well, then we have a health crisis. Where the heck where is all this coming from? And the answer is stress. Over 90% of illness is directly loaded to stress. Why? Because it shuts down the immune system. It shuts down the growth. You are weak. And it was only for a short period, years and years ago. But today, that period of stress is extended so it's like 24/7. And I say, well, that is the major compromise of life on this planet, the fears. And I go, well, it's real interesting because the media loves to give us all the fears and manipulates us. So when you watch the news, you're just dripping stress hormones through your body, compromising yourself. And so it's a point where we have to get out of this continuous chronic connection with fear, which is everywhere on this planet. Just watch the news, surf the web, look out your window and you can see this place is crazy and everybody's trying to do what? Well, fear closes you down. Well, you can't survive. Why? Because you need to be engaged with the world and respond to everything. But if you're closing yourself down, you pulled yourself out. And that's where disease starts to begin.